walking picket line. Her rise in the party exposed her to the organization, the techniques, and the innermost workings of the communism in the United States. Fortunately for you and for me, Dr. Dodd broke with the party with the full realization of the tremendous influence that the conspiracy was exerting in the United States. Dr. Dodd has done everything in her power to alert the people of this country to the danger. This is to her everlasting credit. I would at this time like to just go over her history. Dr. Dodd is the youngest of a family of 10 children, attended public schools, graduated from Hunter's College with an A.B. degree in 1925, with cum laude and Phi Beta Kappa, and also was president of the student council. Attended Columbia University from 1925 to 1927. Graduate work in political science and worked towards a doctorate. In New York University, 1930, she received her doctorate of jurisprudence. Admitted to the bar in New York State in 1931. Her history continues. She taught school at Hunter College from 1926 to 1939. She became active in union affairs, was legislative representative and organizer from 1935 to 1944. She joined the Communist Party and became a member of the National Committee in 1944 to 1948. But then later she testified before the Senate Internal Security Committee of the House On-American Activities, and also testified before the Senate Rules Committee, Department of Justice. She returned to the Catholic Church with conditional baptism by Bishop Fulton J. Sheen in 1952. She is the author of a book, School of Darkness. She taught school at St. John's University Law School between 1953 and 1961. At present, is a practicing attorney in New York City. It is my great pleasure to introduce to you a successful lawyer, a renowned author, and a stimulating lecturer, Dr. Bella Dodd.
Chairman, my fellow Americans, I come here to you tonight at a time when I feel that it's extremely important that Americans draw close to one another, that you look at each other, that you take measure of each other, and say, we are the ones who must fight the resistance movement in what is going on in the world today, and in the present steps towards taking over the United States of America by this thing which we call world communism. Now, I know that many of you have read articles on communism, have listened to other lectures, and still one says, if these things which the lecturers say are true, how come, almost step by step, this thing is taking over the world? We begin with the takeover of the Soviet Union in 1917. And we find that the more we Americans have worked towards the analysis of this thing, the closer has come the world control of communism. How come? What causes it? What is this thing which we call communism? And I must say that there is a great deal of misconception as to what the thing is. And there is a great deal of fear built up by both speakers and writers. I have no intention of coming here to Utica tonight, the lovely city of Utica, which, by the way, I think could use a little of that foreign aid money which is being squandered on other countries of the world. There's no doubt in my mind the plants here, for instance, should use some of the $2.5 billion which we have given to Tito's communist republic. But more of that as we go on. Now the question is, ought we to fear this thing? And the answer is, my dear friends, We must understand what we're faced with, and then we must not just hold lectures. We must organize ourselves so that it is possible for the people of this area of New York State to play the part in the defeat of communism. Now, it's not going to be defeated by little secret societies. It's not going to be defeated by just individuals. It's going to be defeated by the kind of organization and the kind of life which you, the people of this area, and the people in the next area and the other areas of the United States will do. Now, what is this thing called communism, and why is it that it is winning victory after victory? Why is it that we in the United States of America today, who talk glibly about containing communism, about having a foreign policy of containment, find that we are now being contained? We, the United States, are being contained, while the Soviet Empire takes over the free world bit by bit. I have no doubt, my dear friends, that the victory will ultimately belong to the free world. I have no doubt that those who have built a Christian civilization, and when I say the word Christian, I refer to that whole complex of the Judeo-Christian civilization, which is based upon the Old Testament and the New Testament, which is based upon the Ten Commandments of Moses and the 11th commandment of Jesus Christ, which says, love thy neighbor as thyself. My dear friends, when I left New York today, I glanced at the newspapers, and I found that in the city of Newark, the leading communist teacher, who was ousted because he refused to tell the Un-American Activities Committee whether he was or was not a communist 5 years ago, was reinstated by the Board of Education there by a vote of 5-4. He was given $51,000 in back pay. The Board of Education also appointed him as head of department of the school where he had taught. If you think that these things happen just by accident, then I say to you, my dear friends, you don't understand what you're up against. When Robert Lowenstein was reinstated to the Board of Education in Newark, we understand that the city of Newark has passed into the hands of those who are pro the left-wing elite. In the city of Newark not long ago, 400 students rioted in front of the junior high school. The reason they rioted, we haven't the slightest idea. Yet 2 of the leading boys were able to disarm a police officer. And for a while it looked as if the police officer's life was in complete danger. And yet when we examine what was behind this riot in Newark before the junior high school, we find that what was behind it is a planned, organized movement to inflame the minds of people on a racial basis. In other words, the communist conspiracy has many different channels of operating. Now, I noticed that your chairman used the word communist conspiracy, and I have used it also. Before I go any further this evening, I would like to differentiate 3 terms so that we will know what we're talking about. I want you to differentiate in your mind, 1, the communist conspiracy, 2, the Communist Party, and 3, the communist movement. These are 3 different concepts, and we must deal with them differently. Now, the communist conspiracy really should not have the word communist before it. It should be called the conspiracy for world control. The communist conspiracy, like all conspiracies, is a secret organization of a group of people who are determined to gain control, or who are determined to accomplish something illegal, sometimes in a legal way and sometimes in an illegal way. Now, what is it that the communist world conspiracy, or the world conspiracy, seeks to accomplish? Now, the conspiracy consists of a small group of people. They are not necessarily located in Moscow or in Leningrad or in Stalingrad or anywhere else in the Soviet Empire. The communist conspiracy consists of men and women who are located in New York, in Moscow, in Paris, in London, in Saigon, in Hong Kong, and throughout the world. Yes, in Leopoldville. The communist conspiracy consists of a group of people who are no longer concerned about what happens in Utica or in Rome or in Kalamazoo or any other small area of the United States or France or England. They are a group of people who are determined to control the natural resources of the world. Yes, they're interested in controlling oil and controlling iron, steel, uranium, yes, timber and land itself. Now this conspiracy for world control of the natural resources of the world leads to many strange phenomena which confuses the people of America who think in terms of those who are interested in business should be against communism. Well, they should be in reality, but unfortunately they're temporary, their sights are set upon immediate control. And for that reason, you will find that a man like Frederick Vanderbilt Field, people ask me over and over again, why should a man like Freddie Field, whom I knew very well in the party, why should he be interested in the communist movement? He is comfortable, he is in business, they have great holdings. Well, the answer is that the world communist conspiracy consists of several different types of groups. And unless we understand that, we cannot achieve an understanding of the problem of how to defend ourselves. So the conspiracy, then, is a small group. Now, the conspiracy operates under many different kinds of labels, because in order to gain control over the natural resource of the world, they must control the 2.5 billion human beings there are in the world. And there must be different ways of controlling them. Now, the way they control the Soviet Union or Russia was by actually taking it over physically by revolution and establishing a static control over the peoples of Russia. Thus, in 1917, a very small group of members of the Communist Party, aided and assisted by the world conspiracy, financed by the world conspiracy, were able to establish hegemony and control over 200 million people of Russia who didn't know what had hit them. Now, the communist conspiracy, the world conspiracy on a worldwide basis, operates under different labels at different times. Sometimes it uses the communist label, sometimes it uses the socialist label, sometimes it uses the humanist label, sometimes it uses goodwill label. It is willing to use any group of people that they can move into action for the ultimate control. However, what has happened is that in establishing a world revolutionary movement, they have frozen control into the hands of, a massive control, into the hands of a group of lands, a group of countries, which they control by military force and by psychological and by governmental force. They are not above using questions of psychological warfare and so and so. This is the communist conspiracy. If you ask me who is in the communist conspiracy from America, I could not give you the answers, even though I was a member of the National Committee of the Communist Party. I could point to maybe 1 to 2 to 3. I could suspect a lot of people, but I could not give you the names of those who are the real conspirators behind this whole thing. Yet, conspirators there are, because if there weren't a conspiracy, there wouldn't be this almost symphony of movement of peoples and events which leads almost diabolically and in a very planned way towards the elimination of freedom on a worldwide basis. The communist parties, on the other hand, the communist parties which exist, which were established in 1919 by the Third International, the communist parties which were established in every country of the world, and in the United States, ours was established in 1919. They were established as a small group of people, as the framework, as the blueprint, as the skeleton of the new form of government which they hope to establish at some time in the future. Thus the Communist Party of the United States of America, which, by the way, many people will pooh-pooh and laugh and say, well, it's a small party, it's inconsequential. My dear friends, J. Edgar Hoover has said that there are at present approximately 20,000 members in the Communist Party of America today. Now, of course, you can laugh at that and say that that's about as large as some large universities we have. You can put 20,000 into a thimble. Yet remember that in 1917, the Communist Party of Russia, which had been established much earlier than ours was established, the Communist Party of Russia consisted of 25,000 members. These 25,000 members who knew exactly where they were going, who had plans, who were being moved in the direction of their objective of control over the Russian people. These 25,000 members, whereas the rest of the mass of people were just didn't know what was going on. They may have suspected certain things, but by and large they were completely ignorant of what was going on. Yet those 25,000 members were able, in the period from January 1917, when the socialists or the social democrats had seized power, the Kerensky government had seized power in Russia, from January of 1917 to November 5, the October Revolution, was a brief period of only 9 months. In 9 months, Lenin, with the assistance of Kerensky, well, not with the assistance of Kerensky, but with building on what Kerensky had done, in those 9 months he was able to take over 200 million people. Now, Stalin once put it very graphically, one of these meetings, in telling you how effective a Communist Party can be. Because a Communist Party must originally be destructive. He said it takes 300 or 400 people to build a bridge. He said, but it takes only 1 or 2 to destroy it. And so the Communist parties, which are established in every country of the world, and sometimes they're called by other names. Sometimes they're called labor parties or socialist labor parties. But the answer as to whether they're Communist parties or not is to whether they are affiliated, whether they are sympathetic, whether they're cooperative with the Soviet system. Now, the Communist parties of the world are a skeleton of the new form of government. I say that advisedly because so many people are misled by the word party. You're accustomed to thinking of the Democratic Party and the Republican Party and even the Labor Party and the Socialist Party as political parties. The Communist Party is not a political party. The Communist Party should be called a communist government because the Communist Party is interested and addresses itself to the problems, to all the problems that mankind in its geographical boundary has. In other words, the Communist Party of New York State is concerned with the elections. It's concerned with all the political parties. And I might tell you, since I was one of the people who operated up and down the state. I know practically every crook and cranny of the state. Love it dearly. But I operated for the Communist Party in this area. And I know, for instance, we had our fingers in the Democratic Party, we had our fingers in the Republican Party, we had our fingers in the American Labor Party, we had our fingers in the trade union movement. It is interested not only in politics, it is interested in the economics, it is interested in the social life of the people. It is tremendously interested in the educational structure of the people. It is interested in the cultural life of the people. It is interested in the morality of the people. Not necessarily promote better morality, because the Communist Party at one time will promote debauchery. It will promote chaos in morality. At another time, it will set up very high ideals, depending upon which suits their purpose at a particular time, since their approach to morality is a question of tactics and not a question of principle. For them, there is only one morality, and that is the support of the communist system. So the Communist Party, which may seem a little ridiculous to you, I remember we used to go to the state legislature in Albany frequently, at the public hearing. I remember one time we had a hearing on the milk bill, which was pending. There was a milk strike in New York State, and there was a great big hearing that was held in the educational hall there in Albany. And the Communist Party spoke up, the Socialist Party spoke up, and so forth and so on. Now, many people are fooled by what the Communist Party says on current social, economic problems, because the Communist Party makes it its business to be in the forefront of any particular ill that there is, any particular unhappiness that there may be, any particular injustice that there may be, not for the sake of bringing about injustice, or not for the sake of bringing about justice out of the injustice, but for the sake of gaining control and getting the ear of the mass of the people. I remember one time at that milk hearing, the farmers, we came to the question whether the Communist Party should be allowed to speak or not. And the legislative leaders didn't want them to speak. And so one of the farmers said, well, gee, let them speak. They drink milk, don't they? And that, of course, solved everything. When the Communist took the forum, he was for giving everything to everybody. In other words, they could afford to give everything in words to everybody and gain the following of people, since they were not responsible for controlling the situation. The Communist Party, if it consists in your district of only 10 people, is something that you have to watch, is something that you have to be worried about, because what happens is those 10 people are not just 10 people. They multiply by the number of activities that they engage in. For instance, when I was a communist on the college campus, I was not only a member of the Instructors Association, but I was also a member of the Association of University Professors. I was a member of the Anti-Fascist League. I was a member of maybe 10 or 12 different organizations. So that in those organizations, I was able to find other people to carry on the work of the party. The Communist Party is a nerve center. It's like an enzyme which creates the power for passing on the material which has to be utilized. The Communist Party of America at present has been declared outlaw by the Supreme Court, but they were given a chance to re-argue their case. And in the meanwhile, they are building a mass movement. You'll find them here in this district holding meetings. You'll find them in the Albany district holding meetings. Out in Long Island, they took over one of the biggest banks the other night, held a meeting with the leading communists, bringing the, when I say the biggest banks, they have an auditorium, which was utilized for the purpose of gaining support from people who say, well, why shouldn't they be free to speak up? Isn't America free for people to speak up? And the answer is, my dear friends, the Communist Party exists, and if the Supreme Court decision is upheld, as it may be, although I doubt it, if the Supreme Court decision is upheld, you will look for the Communist Party being an illegal party and existing because no legal decision will drive them out of existence at this particular time. The last term which I wanted to discuss with you was the communist movement. Communist conspiracy, Communist Party, Communist movement. Now the communist movement is an attempt to establish a social, ideological attitude which is pro-left, which is in favor of the communist opinion. Now, you must understand what communism is in order to understand when you're being indoctrinated and taken over into the communist movement. It does not come to you in labels. It comes to you under very pleasing devices. Now, the communist movement in America has been in existence for a long time. A lot of people think that communism just came after the Russian Revolution. Oh, no, my dear friends. Back in the middle of the 19th century, Karl Marx came to the United States. As a matter of fact, he was here both before and after the Civil War. Karl Marx lectured in New York, he lectured in Philadelphia, he lectured in Boston. And as a matter of fact, the first Communist International, which was established in 1865, was disbanded by its delegates, its international delegates meeting in Philadelphia in 1876. So that America has not been foreign to this world communist movement, a communist open movement, and not of the conspiracy itself, which holds its meetings maybe in the Waldorf Tower, maybe in Berlin, maybe in Saigon, maybe in Hong Kong. It holds meetings everywhere throughout the world. But the actual open communist movement, the first international, the second international, the third international, the first one closed its life here in the United States. Now, what did they unleash upon the United States? They unleashed an attitude of life. And essentially, what is communism? Communism is a new attitude. Or maybe not new, maybe it's as old as life itself. But it's new, it's different from the attitude that we have, that the Western world has had. that the Christian world has had upon the concept of what is man. Now, in order to gain control over mankind, the idea is that you must be able to control the human mind. Now, the communist concept of man is materialistic. The concept of man is that he's just nothing but matter. Man is born, he grows, he dies, he decays, and that's the end of him. And if that is true, then everything which the communists say is correct. If that is not true, if the Christian concept, the Judeo-Christian concept of man, as embodied in the Old and New Testament, is that man is the creature of God. If, as David said in that beautiful 8th Psalm of his, in which he says, O God, what is man that thou art mindful of him, and the Son of Man that thou dost visit him? And then he answers it by saying, Thou hast created man a little less than the angels, to have dominion over all the other creatures of the earth, to serve God in this world, and to know him and be happy with him in the next world. If that is the concept of man, then each one of us, no matter how crippled, how deformed, how weak, no matter what we are, each one of us has that divine spark which is trying to find its way back to God. Each one of us then becomes a sacred person, an individual, a person very important to respect personality. Then it follows, like night and day, that you can't kill off those who are sick, those who are deformed, without violating the great rules of life. On the other hand, if the communist concept is correct, then it is right that those who are the superior intellect, and notice, for instance, the rise of the left-wing elite, the superior intellect, the rule of the university, of certain types of universities. If man is just nothing but matter, then the superior intellects have the right to rule the inferior intellect and to eliminate those that they consider a drag upon society. The communist movement on a worldwide basis has pushed the idea of euthanasia, the idea that a person who is too sick should be killed off. The weak and the imbecilic should be killed off. Now you may say, but gee, that isn't true of the communists, it's true of the Nazis, isn't it? And here we come to another story. The communist movement on a worldwide basis does different things at different times. In the United States of America today, which they're seeking to get ready for the kill, they will do everything they possibly can to unleash confusion, chaos, depravity, perversion, conflict of people against one another, of parents against children, children against parents, of wives against women against men, of black against white, of Protestant against Catholic, of Jews against Catholics and Protestants, and Catholics and Protestants against Jews. In other words, there is every attempt is made to divide, to create chaos, to create confusion, and to make a body politic so paralyzed that it's unable to resist. Now, in the light of that, my dear friends, we need desperately centers of learning which are convinced that this Christian civilization is worth saving. And we need scholars who are not worried about degrees, who are not worried about great big campuses, who are not worried about the great institutions, the great universities that we have today, which have forfeited their right to be called universities. There are in the United States at present, and I say this categorically, I would say there are more than a dozen universities that are worse than name universities. The others are institutions for indoctrination, for keeping a people moving in the direction in which the elite wanted to go. The learned people, those who are interested in knowledge, those who are interested in the basic learning of mankind, in the training of the intellect, have unfortunately forfeited to those who have created these institutions. They become institutions. And what we need desperately, we need men of learning who are willing to get together in a loft, or in a garage, or in an old house, without campuses and without all the frills God himself. Said, well, Bella, we don't know. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. You can't prove it in the laboratory, she said. Well, I got the idea that religion was for old ladies who couldn't stand on their own 2 feet. I got the idea that there was no such thing as an afterlife. And so by the time I graduated from high school, I had taken my first big step towards communism. My first big step was separating myself from, just cutting the roots of that whole 2,000 years of culture and tradition, which belonged to me rightfully, and which I gave away through the wind. My first year at college, I went to Hunt College, which is a free city college in the city of New York. My first year at college, my teacher of English literature happened to be a member of the Communist Party. Now that wasn't known to the people at college, but it came to be known to people like myself because she took an interest in me. She was the first person who gave me books on the revolution, on the Russian Revolution. And then she equated it with the French Revolution. Because the French Revolution saved people from serfdom, so on, got rid of the old medieval abuses. And the Russian Revolution would do the same for the Russian people. Of course, that was a very simple and very uninformed approach to history. But I didn't know that. I didn't know as much history as she did. By the time I got through with Sarah Park's class, I no longer believed in patriotism. You know, patriotism at present in the schools and out of the schools is regarded as pretty corny. Anyone who believes in being patriotic is regarded as either not quite right or a person who is, a person that isn't too important. Watch yourself on that particular question. Notice, for instance, the attitude of even the young people. The person who respects the flag, the person who respects the Constitution, the person who talks about Americanism is regarded as a person who makes you uncomfortable. I don't mean you because you are the people who are fighting this thing. But this is a tendency. By the time I left Sarah Park's class, I had taken a second big step towards communism. For Sarah Park did to me what communists do to young people throughout the world. They make them unhappy and dissatisfied and ashamed of their own country, if their country is strong and powerful like ours is. In a country like the United States, the communists constantly press on the fact that the American government, the American system, has been imperialistic, that it has sucked the lifeblood out of the Chinese, the Japanese, the South Americans, and so on. They create this business of dollar diplomacy, the fact that we're interested only in that kind of diplomacy which gives us more and more dollars. By the time I left Sarah Park's class, I regarded myself as a citizen of the world, no longer somebody who had a duty towards the people of my own town, my own city, my own country. Because unless you love the people of your own city, and your own town, your own state, and your own country, you cannot love the world. You can't just jump from one to the other. A person says he loves everybody, really loves no one. My third big step towards communism I took throughout the rest of my college life. And that was in the approach towards acts of immorality. Now, I'm not going to stand here tonight and make an open confession. But this is an intellectual thing, not so much an experimental thing. I began to get the idea that there was no such thing as sin. Now, the word sin has also become very corny these days. Nobody talks about sin except maybe the preacher once in a while. And we kind of give it faint encouragement. But sin, of course, is a concept of wrong. If there is no God, as the communist says, then there is no such thing as sin. And if there is no sin, then how shall we behave? We will then behave according to that which makes us most comfortable, or which gives us the most return. In other words, truth, theft, adultery, and all the other sins which are committed. If the 10 Commandments are just nothing but sociology, which an old man by the name of Moses gave to a primitive people, the Hebrews, in an early period of history, then you free the individuals to do the bidding of the Communist Party, then certainly, if there is no sin, then you can kill off a child that has cerebral palsy because he's not going to be worth anything. I've never seen the Communists, for instance, send anybody down to the leper colony. I've seen both Protestants, Catholics, send missionaries who gave their lives to these people who were going to die anyhow. But they did because they had the concept of the greatness of the soul of these people. Communism, on the other hand, says no dice. Now, while Hitler was in power in Germany, many terrible things were exposed to the public as to the things he did. Unfortunately, the same press which exposed the things which Hitler did has refused, because it is controlled by the World Communist Conspiracy, by and large, has refused to expose the terrible things to being done in the Soviet world. Did you know? Now, I learned it from the New York Times, but did you know, I just appeared once in the New York Times, did you know that in North Korea, the communists have taken over 1 million Korean men and transported them to Inner Mongolia because they say that the Korean type is not a type of humanity they want to procreate, and they have brought men from Mongolia into North Korea to change the kind of people you have there. They have decided that they are the ones to make decisions as to which nation shall exist, which nation shall be destroyed, which racial stock shall be promoted, and which racial stock shall not be promoted. Outside of Leningrad, there is a city which is devoted to nothing but experimentation. It's called after the great Russian scientist Pavlov. But the experimentation which was carried on dogs by Pavlov are carried on human beings in the city of Pavlova. My dear friends, it is the attempt to wipe out the aggressive characteristics in mankind became quite obvious when Stalin died. His successor, George Malenkov, made one speech in the Moscow area in which he said something which caught my attention. He said, as long as I remain in the Kremlin, there will be no more lobotomies in the Soviet Union. Now, as all of you know, a lobotomy is an operation for the purpose of cutting out a part of, or destroying a part of the brain which is in the frontal lobe, which is supposed to be the section which deals with the aggressive characteristics. For George Malenkov to have made that statement, there will be no more lobotomy performed, speaks volumes as to the number of people who were tortured in the attempt to achieve a non-aggressive human being. And notice, my dear friends, if you remove from human beings a belief in God, a belief in the afterlife, a belief in the supernatural, and if all that you're going to give him is a question of material comfort, material concepts, you're going to have to do something to control his aggressive tendencies, because this human mind is capable of many things. And one of the attempts to control has been through the so-called scientific approach to mankind. Now, I became a member of the Communist Party in 1932. I became a secret member of the Communist Party because at that time I was a teacher at Hunter College. After I got out of high school, after I got out of college, Hunter College, I was so regarded so popularly in the college itself because I accommodated myself to all of these new ideas that I was asked to come back and become a teacher. And I taught the same kind of misinformation which I had obtained. Now, why do I say misinformation? Am I making fun of the American colleges? Certainly not. The great American colleges have created technicians of high quality, scientists of high quality, engineers of high quality. But in the field of philosophy, in the field of where we need people at present to give safety and surety to our people, we have failed absolutely, because our whole approach towards philosophy was a pragmatic approach. That is good, which is successful. That has been the philosophy which is substituted for the Christian philosophy by this group of people who have impressed their stand upon education. So, my dear friends, when I was asked to teach, and it's a strange thing that in this great country of ours, where my people had come here to this country with practically nothing, my father and mother were practically illiterate. They could write their names and read simple headlines. But that's about all. In a country which is practically illiterate, I achieved an education. And when I got out of college, my father had done so well in his free enterprise system, and he said to me, "Will you go, if you want to go to Europe, study. Instead of going to the country or to the centers of spiritual strength." I said, "Oh, certainly, I want to go to Europe." And I went to Berlin. I went to the University of Berlin. Now, Berlin in 1929, 1930, 31, 32 was unfortunately just like New York City is today, filled with confusion, with the Communist Party having a stranglehold on many of its institutions, perversions completely rampant, and this was the place that I went to. Fortunately for me, when I got there, I was revolted by the things that I saw. Night after night on the university campus, there were people who fought with each other. The communists fought the socialists, and the socialists fought the Christian Democrats, and the Christian Democrats fought those who believed in the king, and so forth and so on. There were constant maiming and fighting with one another. And the middle-class people that I saw, I could see the fear in their faces. They who had believed in the great welfare state which had been built up in Germany, with all the insurance and so forth and so on, I could see them wiped out, impoverished, terrified. And I came back to the United States with a sense of impending disaster, hoping and praying that it would not happen to the United States of America. When I got home, one of the first groups that approached me was one of the leaders of the Communist International. She came to my home and she said, "Mrs. Dodd, we hear that you're an anti-fascist." Well, I'm proud of the fact that I was an anti-fascist in 1929, 1930. But I'm bitterly ashamed of the fact that I did not realize that communism was moved by the same forces of conspiracy as had moved some of the fascist and Nazi developments. And so, my dear friends, I fell heir to the error which is still rampant on American college universities, but which was at that time strongly entrenched. And that is the theory that the extreme that's communism and fascism, communism over here and fascism over there. Communism and fascism are two extreme opposites. That communism is just nothing but liberalism, progressivism, socialism, and then communism. That it's in the direction of something which is good, whereas fascism is, you begin with the conservative, middle of the road person, and you go towards the extreme conservative, reactionary, and then you go towards fascism. That these two ideologies were supposed to be the opposites of each other. Instead, I had to learn the hard way, something which all of you now know, that communism and fascism really did exactly the same thing. The communism enthrones the mystique of the common man, of the proletariat, and worships that. It tears down the God, it tears down the belief in the supernatural, and it enthrones the dignity of the proletariat, the industrial working class. Whereas fascism tore down the concept of God and tore down the concept of a belief in the supernatural and built the concept of the adoration of the mystique of the state, the power of the state. And fascism and Nazism, of course, built up the mystique of the worship of race and blood and tore down the whole idea of God and the supernatural. And so now we know, after having captured the documents in Berlin and in other sections, that there was a close interrelationship between this national socialism, which was established in Germany and Italy and began spreading, and communism. After all, when you had the Soviet-Nazi pact, it was not just an accident, nor was it unusual what happened was that we saw that openly, we did not see the continuous working together down below the scenes. When the story is finally written, and by the way, we need desperately scientists and historians who will analyze these. What the communists do constantly is to build two opposites. They control both sides, but they will say to you, we're against fascism, we're against fascism. We are communists, but we're against fascism. So the idea is that you're going to move right into their arms. They give you false alternatives. I became a communist in 1932. I became a communist when Miss Harriet Silverman came to see me. She said, "Would you hear, Mrs. Dodd, you're an anti-fascist?" I said, "Certainly." She said, "We know that you didn't like what you saw in Germany." And I said, "I certainly did not. I saw the rise of the Hitler movement." And she said to me, "But you know, some of us are communists." And I, with all the lugubriousness and the superficiality of the American educated person, said, "Well, I don't care about labels. I'd fight fascism with the devil himself." Don't question my mind as to whom I fought fascism with. When I joined the Communist Party, now here's another thing which you must remember. There are a lot of people who say, "Well, did you have a card?" Now they think the card is the important thing. My dear friends, you've got to stop thinking in that way. The person acts like a duck and talks like a duck and quacks like a duck, then he is a duck. Don't look for his party card. And so with me, I didn't get a party card. I didn't get a party card, so I became a member of the National Committee of the Communist Party. The reason for it? I was too valuable a person for the Communist Party. I was a professor in one of the universities. I could move among teachers. I could move among parents. I could move among politicians as a leader of teachers and parents. I could say honestly, well, I'm not a member of the Communist Party. I think some of the things they do are right. But I could say half-truthfully, but the half. However, I met with the communist leaders. I took directions from them. I gave reports to them and was given instructions as to how to continue. During those years when I was a communist, unfortunately, I was the kind of person who was moved and impelled into the communist movement because I believed that they were interested in improving conditions of the working class. Having been a Christian, I had the residue of the Christian desire to improve conditions, to help my fellow man. But I had lost the key as to how you do it, because there's a right way of doing it and a wrong way of doing it. And what the communists are doing all over the world today is they are appealing to Christian consciences, to the conscience of those who are believing in spiritual life. They're appealing to those consciences, and then they're pointing out the evils which exist and saying, look, it's because of Christianity, it's because of the spiritual life that these things exist. What you need is a scientific approach towards this, and we'll give it to you. In other words, they besmirched those things which make us strong. And so in 1932, when I became a communist, I could see only the evils which existed. I saw the lines of people who were poor. I saw the lines of people who were on the red lines because of the Depression. I lived through the Depression. I was a young woman through the Depression. My heart was big. But my head, unfortunately, was not well trained. And I failed to understand the evils which I was associating myself with. And so from 1932 to about 1938, I used to work as a teacher. I used to come up here to Albany. I used to come up to Albany to lobby for the teachers' union. And then I'd go back and work with the trade unions, the labor unions, the people on strike and so on. I always say that as a communist, I worked 26 hours a day. And that's one of the things that Americans need to learn, too. Those who wish to save this country have got to give more of their time and their attention to it. By at first, I joined the movement out of a will to goodness. And by the way, that's one thing you have to understand. If you don't understand that there are millions of human beings throughout this world who are joining the communist movement out of a will to goodness, you will make very sad mistakes. Misguided will to goodness. They don't know where they're going, they don't know what they're being trapped into, but a will to goodness nevertheless. However, those who remain in the Communist Party, like myself, who joined originally for will to goodness, actually stayed because it gave us a sense of power. As time went on, I got more and more power. In 1938, I left my job as a teacher, and I took a job with the trade union movement. I took a job with the teachers' union. I organized teachers' unions throughout the state, just as I had to organize unemployed councils throughout the state. And then I decided that the Communist Party needed me more, and they had asked me to join openly. In 1943, I joined the Communist Party openly and became a member of its national committee. But during all those years, I was functioning with the party and was a member of the party. I was making contributions, I was getting instructions, I was admitted to their secret meetings, and so forth and so on. So that there was lie upon lie in the living within the communist movement. But, as I said before, the will to goodness may start you off. But if you stay with the movement, largely it's because of the desire to get power. By 1943, this country was in the middle of a war, and the Soviet Union had so maneuvered things, the world conspiracy had so maneuvered things, that the United States was on the same side as the Soviet Union. That was the beginning of the end. For we gave to Russia $11 billion of lend-lease, which was neither lending nor leasing. We harbored within our government men and women who were part of the communist conspiracy and who were agents who functioned at the very highest levels, as you know, within our Treasury Department, within our State Department, within various other institutions. There's one thing which I can tell you tonight. It is that the people that I knew, who were just simple people on the same level as I was, back in the 30s, are now wielding tremendous influence. They are in key positions. And these are the people who are making policy, unfortunately, in sections of the American government. I left the Communist Party. I began feeling uneasy about it in 1945. Before that, I was uneasy, but I felt that we were going along the directions of the Soviet Union. We were in alliance with the Soviet Union. One of the things that made me uneasy, a strike that I had to lead on the waterfront, lasted for weeks upon weeks. I went to see the chairman of the Communist Party, a man by the name of Bill Foster, who was in charge of the labor division that time. And I said, Bill, why don't we settle the strike? The men are losing money, the families are in want. He said to me, Dodd, don't be so sentimental. We've got to train these people so that they are able to kill. I hadn't really quite realized what I had entered. I fell back on my heels. In 1945, the American Communist Party got a letter from the Communist International. It was signed by Jacques Duclos, the head of the French Communist Party. What was that letter? It was a letter in which he said to the American Communist Party, look, comrades, the time has come for you to stop being so democratic. Democratic united fronts were all right during the war. Now you've got to get back to the business of making America ready for the revolution. The American working class, this letter said, is too bourgeoisified. They own too many cars, they have too many homes, they send their children to colleges, they will be useless in a world proletarian movement. Therefore, you've got to be ready to destroy the American working class. I again fell back on my heels. This was not what I had joined this movement for. I realized I was in the wrong booth, but dear God, what do you do about it? In the process of being in the Communist Party, I had lost my family, who were not sympathetic. I had lost my husband, who had decided to divorce me because he couldn't stand to have his name bandied about in all the activities I was in. And I had sold my birthright as a woman for a mess of pottage. Now suddenly I realized that I was on the verge, on the threshold of treason to this country. And I became literally sick. I went to the leader of the Communist Party in my district in New York in 1946, and I said to a man by the name of Bill Norman, Bill, I don't want to work for the Communist Party anymore. At this time, I held the job of being the representative of the Communist Party here in Albany and in Washington as their legislative representative. And Bill Norman turned to me and said, Dodd, nobody gets out of this party. You die, you disappear, we get rid of you. But you don't get out. Now, he didn't really mean that. What he meant was that anybody who had achieved any status in the movement, because, as I said before, there had been over 3.5 million members of the Communist Party who had been in and out of the party in America. But when he said that to me, something within me revolted. And I went to him and I took my keys out of my pocket. It may have been something of the past of my love for the American spirit. It may have been part of the fact that I've been imbued with the love of the American Constitution. But I took my keys and I said, Bill, I don't want to work for you anymore. Mind you, I didn't say I don't want to belong to the party anymore. I was too scared to say that. I don't want to work for you anymore. And I took my keys and I threw them across the desk. And I slammed the door and walked out, shaking to the very inner part of it. I'd never been afraid very much before then. But I then knew what fear was. For the next 2 or 3 years, I was followed both by the FBI and by the Russian police. And the Russian police operate in this country just as freely as does your next-door neighbor. When we recognized the Soviet Union, we got the right to establish an embassy in Moscow. But that's about it. They got the right to establish consulates in all of our major port cities because we are a free enterprise country. Therefore, you have the Russian consulates in San Francisco, in San Diego, in New Orleans, in Philadelphia, in Boston, in New York, and so forth and so on. And your operators come and go through those. Particular money in real estate in that area to the United Nations. I'm sure I was sent altruism. But it's become a sovereign territory. As I said, I was followed both by the Russian police and by the FBI. And during those 2 years, I was so stupid and so brainwashed because the party constantly attacked the FBI as the Gestapo. My mind was so brainwashed that I didn't know which I was afraid of most. And of course, I can here to say to that during the years that I've come to know the FBI, I've never known a more dedicated group of public servants and a finer group of public servants. But at that time, I was just myopic in my approach to the entire thing. What happened was that if it hadn't been for the FBI, I wouldn't be here to tell you the story. Because during those 2 years, everything was done to seal my lips and to close the information which I had within me. So stupid was I, however, that I wasn't ready to testify. I wasn't ready to give the information. It wasn't until a spiritual rebirth took place in me. It wasn't until a number of things happened in my life. I was in Washington one day. I was arguing a case before the Board of Immigration Appeals. And I ran into an old friend of mine who was a congressman at that time from the Bronx, a man by the name of Christopher McGrath. And Christopher had always been very fond of me when we were children. He took a look at me and he said, Bella, he said, you look miserable. You want some police protection. I know that your life's in danger. So I kind of shook my head and I said, I don't want any more police protection. I've got them following me all the time. I'm forced to change my room, my hotel, so and so on, just on till I see the same faces following me. So then he shook his head and he said, well, would you see a priest? Because I happen to be a Catholic originally, and he was a Catholic. And suddenly within me, I shouted yes. I don't know what it is. What would I say to a priest? But having shouted yes, he went upstairs and he put a call into a young Monsignor by the name of Fulton J. Sheen, who at that time was teaching at Catholic University of America. And Fulton Sheen graciously agreed to see me that evening at 10 o'clock at his home in Chevy Chase. I went out to Chevy Chase, filled with all kinds of fears and so forth and so on. When he came into the little room in which I was, I burst out crying. And he patted me on the shoulder and he said, there, it won't be long now. And the more he patted me, the more I cried. Sobbing just went on. I was completely alone by this time. I had wandered all over the face of the earth. I was left alone. I was practicing law at the time, but as soon as I left the Communist Party smeared me so that the cases which I had in the office went out of the window. The rooms which I had rented my office with other Communist lawyers, they left me. I was left with a great big suite of rooms with a great big plant with nothing to use it with. And they counted upon that to make me jump out of the window. When I saw Fulton Sheen and he patted me on the shoulder and cheers came, I felt as if I had reached safe landing. And he took me into his chapel and we both went on our knees. And for the first time in my life, I knew peace, which I hadn't known for many, many years. When I got up from my knees, my tears were dry. And then he said something to me which, he said, Bella, he said, if you are to do the things which, if you are to protect the people that you say that you love, the people of this country, and all the human beings in the world, to do the right thing, you must know something about Christianity. Because you're a sentimental Christian, maybe. Your parents were peasants, but you as an educated woman have to know. Now I know I'm talking to a mixed audience here, so I do want to make this plea, whether it was Bishop Sheen or any prelate, any person who believes in God. What he gave me there and thereafter, because he was kind enough to instruct me. What he gave me was, he gave me back that which had been cut off from my education throughout the years I had gone through high school and college. He put roots on the different disciplines of learning. For instance, many of you have worried about the kind of books that your children should read. Well, on what basis shall you choose a book? Shall it be on the basis of the language it uses, the punctuation it has, the alliterativeness it has? What shall be the basis of your choice? Well, understanding Christianity, I say that the choosing literature must be based upon that which is found in the things that we believe in. Take, for instance, the question of medicine. You send your boy to medical school, and the questions, the moral questions which he has to address himself to as to whether he shall allow life to die, whether he shall struggle to keep it alive, what things he shall do, under what circumstances. How shall he make that decision? Well, unless he has a body of belief, a frame of reference, how shall he make that decision? I'm a lawyer, and I'm supposed to be interested in justice. But if there is no God who is supposed to be perfect justice, then law becomes nothing but a series of rules laid down by men, and I, as a lawyer, have to decide whether I'm going to try to outwit them or live within them. How shall I make my decision? The same thing is true on the whole question of what shall be the relationship of man and woman to each other. How shall we make the decision? Shall we make it just on the question of how shall I be happy? And how shall we define happiness? Unless there's a basic belief, it's impossible to make decisions. 186 ministers went to the New Jersey legislature 2 years ago and petitioned for the right of passing a law to permit doctors to kill human beings who were suffering. How did those men decide upon that? They must have lost some of their belief in Christianity. Because thou shalt not kill. It doesn't say you shan't kill those who are healthy. It says thou shalt not kill. This is the thing which we've been robbed of in the education system we have. Now, the Russians haven't been robbed of a frame of reference. They have a different frame of reference. There is no Russian teacher, there is no Russian trade union leader, there's no Russian artist, there's no Russian government person who goes to a college or university who does not take 3 years of dialectical materialism, which is the philosophical basis of the Soviet system. They therefore do know that if they have a problem, they refer it to their philosophic base. They may be wrong, 1,000 times wrong, but they have a base on which to make a decision. What is causing so much of the mental disturbance in a country like ours today? A wealthy, kind country, a country that is kind to everyone, to its underprivileged, to everyone. Why do we have so much of the mental illness? We have mental illness, first of all, because we're being used. Our minds are being affected by this thing. It's being stimulated. But we also have it because we do not know. We have no frame of reference as to what our actions shall be. What kind of television programs do we want? How do you make the decision? You make the decision on the basis of what's pretty, what's attractive, of what stimulates you? Or do you make it on the basis of that which it promotes, that which is good, and that which is desirable, and that which is going to make for a better living? In the Soviet Union, They have achieved some degree of stability because they have a basic philosophy which they base everything else upon for their people. And so I think, my dear friends, we've got to get back in education to a time when we do have a basis, a frame of reference. If we let Christianity slide down into nothingness, it will not be long before the millions of human beings will be worthless. Where killing off 35 million Chinese, as has been done in the Chinese Revolution, will be considered as unimportant in the history of the world. Now, just one last word, and then I'm going to stop. I know that you may have questions that you want to ask. After I saw Bishop Sheen, I was troubled as to whether I should testify before the Senate committees, before the House On-American Activities Committee. I was a sentimentalist because I had worked among the common mass of the communists and of their front people. I didn't want to testify because I didn't want to hurt people. I didn't realize what the important thing was. So one day I went to Bishop Sheen and I said to him, look, I'm being pushed by the FBI, I'm being pushed by the committees in Washington. What shall I do? He said, Bella, I'm not going to make that decision for you. You're going to make the decision yourself. But I'll help you by giving you 3 questions which you ought to ask yourself. He said, 1, ask yourself, do I have information which is essential for the safety of my country? 2, will I be telling the truth? 3, will I be doing it out of malice? If you can answer those 3 questions, he said, you will be able to make a decision. At the end of the week, I began testifying. And the interesting thing is that as soon as I testified, as soon as I put my information on record with the FBI, with the Senate Internal Security Committee, with the House On-American Activities Committee, with the Department of Justice, as soon as I testified, the harassment, the following by the Russian police ceased. What they had intended to do was to drive me to commit suicide or to be hurt so that I would remain silent with the information which I had. But once I had given it, that was it. There are many things which one learns as one goes along this path. It was a lonely and devastating kind of life. It still is not a very pleasant kind of thing, because with the rise in the power of the communist movement, the rise in the power of these people who are not, don't call themselves communists, but who are in key positions, what happens is that you are squeezed, that you are smeared, that you are attacked, and that you are unable to fight off the attack because your friends often do not understand how to assist you. There is one last thing, and that is the question of under what labels do the communists fight. I've explained to you the communist conspiracy which fights under many different labels. When I joined the Communist Party, I thought that the movement was a monolithic thing. You know, the district committee, the local committee, the county committee, the state committee, the national committee. I thought that was it. But I had to learn the hard way that the communist movement and the conspiracy operate through many different organizations with different labels. That since the communist theory of getting where it wants is through conflict, creating conflict, they will very often create an organization for the purpose of engendering conflict. If no conflict exists, they will engender the conflict and engender it at a certain position which drags the whole public opinion to the left in the direction of communism. And so, when I was in the teachers' union, we had communists, we had socialists, we had Trotskyites, we had Lovestonites, we had all kinds of little splinter groups. And I thought they were fighting each other. Sometimes they would fight each other, sometimes they would amalgamate. And I thought they were genuinely separate movements. Suddenly, when I began to come to the end of my days in the party, I realized that these separate movements were all pulled by strings from one center. They were pulled from one center when they wanted to create the conflict and the confusion. They never create the conflict and confusion way over on the right, but they will create a right in order to have the left opposed to it so they can drag people in the direction of the left. In 1944, there was a national convention of the Communist Party, at which I was elected to the National Committee openly in Madison Square Garden. During that convention, there were many people who came from all over the United States. One of the social events that I attended was a dinner given by Alexander Trachtenberg, who is an old socialist, graduate of Yale, engineer. He's head of the publishing firm for the communists. Alexander Trachtenberg wined and dined the elite intellectuals from the party that night. Whom did we have there? We had men and women who were members of the state legislature. We had over 100 men and women who were members of the state legislatures from Washington down to New York. They were not elected on the Communist Party ticket. They were elected on the Republican ticket, the Democratic ticket, the former Labor ticket, the Labor Party ticket. In other words, they were elected under other tickets, but they were camouflaged communists. We had professors there, and we had economists there. And in the evening, Trachtenberg rose and made a little speech. And this is one of the bits of wisdom which I want to pass on to you, because it is important, you know it, but I want to print it for you. He said, when we get ready to take the United States, we will not take her under the label of communism. We will not take her under the label of socialism. These labels are unpleasant to the American people and have been smeared too much. We will take the United States under labels which we have made very lovable. We'll take it under liberalism, under progressivism, under democracy. But take it we will. I pass it on to you not because I wish to smear the words liberalism or progressivism or democracy. These words are fine words in themselves if you know what the meaning is. But they use the meaning to cover the Marxist approach to life. And it's under those labels that you must worry. You must worry when you're being sold a bill of goods. We tend to accept labels and to give them the meaning that we want to give them. The word peace, as given by the communists, means the victory of socialism. As President Kennedy used it, and as so many politicians use it, and as we use it, lawyers, for instance, the American Bar Association meeting began pushing the slogan of peace through law. Now that sounds like an awfully nice slogan. But it's, what do you mean by peace? And what do you mean by law? What kind of law? I don't want socialism through Soviet law. I don't even want peace through Soviet law. So the lawyers better get straightened out themselves and ask themselves the meaning of words. There are two phases of life that communists always take over. One is the control over money, and two is the control over words, language. They are fast taking over all of the nice words, all the nice language of the Christian world, and they are taking them to themselves and giving them new connotations, so that when they talk to the world, they are saying one thing which is understood by their followers, but to our ears, it sounds like the things which we should be standing. My dear friends, I've talked too long. My heart is with you. My hope is that out of a group like this, there will come a certain group of people who will organize themselves. For further study, you will not get to heaven on a feather bed. We will not save the United States of America as a constitutional republic. We will not save the sovereignty of the United States by just allowing the people in Washington to operate. We will save it house by house and street by street and town by town by insisting on a kind of life which is based upon the principles which made America great. May God give you the strength and the courage to study, to analyze, and to unite yourselves so that you are good to each other. Because in this fight for survival, which is now upon us, and now in the period of struggle, the next president of the United States will be running the United States, unfortunately, as part of a world government. And I say that unless something very new happens. The items in the newspapers have indicated that serious steps have been taken in the last month which have changed the constitutional basis of the United States government. Perhaps never to be retrieved. But you are in the period of resistance. Resistance is carrying the idea of the thing that you want. Resistance is caring for each other materially, physically, spiritually, uniting each other getting to know each other. There can be no separateness at this time. There must be a sense of union. God give you strength.
To expedite the questions, we're going to have people passing down through the aisles with notepads and pencils. We'll ask those who want to ask questions to please raise their hands and then write them down.
Question, is Hyman Forstenser really a communist? I don't know whether all of you know who Hyman Forstenser is. Is there anybody who doesn't know? Who asked the question? Hyman Forstenser was an assistant commissioner of mental hygiene in the state of New York. But when I knew him, he was my assistant in the legislative committee of the teachers' union. Matter of fact, he was an attorney. But he also, but he didn't practice law. He was a school teacher, a high school teacher. His brother, and it's not fair of me to mention his brother, but I think it's important for me to mention it because I want to be fair to both of them. His brother was the leader of the Republican Party in Washington Heights, New York. I never knew that his brother knew anything about Hyman Forstenser's activity. I would certainly not implicate his brother. But Hyman Forstenser was a member of the Communist Party when I knew him. He was active in the Communist Party. And when he went into the Army, he was selected by other communists in the Army for the purpose of being trained on this mental health question. When he got out of the Army, I don't know who gave him all the assistance, but he immediately jumped into government service and got into the Department of Mental Hygiene in the state of New York. So that it can happen in the state of New York, can it not? What is your evaluation of the metropolitan or federated type of government, metro? Well, I'm not an expert on metro, but I will say this. If the people of the United States were not worried about communism, if we weren't worried about the communist conspiracy, we could solve many of the problems which arise in the running of cities, in the running of states, in the running of departments. And we might, sometimes it's important to unite groups, and sometimes it's important to diversify and to decentralize. I would not give a general answer on a question of this kind. I would address myself to each specific situation. My whole instinct in fighting communism is not to have centralization, to avoid that as much as possible. But I don't want to be foolish about that. There are times when centralization will save money. There are times when centralization will give you greater efficiency. And therefore each must be studied in its own way. Certainly I'm opposed to the increasing power of the federal government over the states and the increasing power of the federal government over the cities, so that what happens is that both our states and our cities become nothing but administrative subdivisions of the federal government. I'm opposed to that and will fight it bitterly at all times. The American system was great because we allowed for a maximum of freedom. But the maximum of freedom must be consistent with safety and good sense. Are there communists in the clergy and then in the National Council of Churches? Well, I'm not a member of the National Council of Churches, so I can't answer that question. But I will say to you that as a member of the Communist Party, I did know of the fact that the party subsidized hundreds of young men to go into the ministry. Now, they went to the more liberal churches. When I say liberal churches, those where the minister could achieve his position in a very brief time, rather than in a long period of time. In other words, there were certain schools for the ministry where they could achieve their job in, let's say, a year or two. And the Communist Party did subsidize these people because when they came out of those institutions, they were capable of making speeches. They took the social doctrine, the doctrine of feed the hungry, help the poor, which in itself is good. But if that is all that we are interested in, spiritually, we are doing what the communists want them to do. There's no question in my mind that the communists will go wherever power is. If they can gain control over certain churches, they will do so. And each one of the churches is the members of the churches are under the obligation of seeing to it that communists and the communist conspiracy and the communist movement stay out of their churches. Unfortunately, what happened to Christendom in the 2,000 years is that a lot of small groups began to develop. We have in America maybe 265 different Christian groups. And each one of them has chopped off a little bit of the fundamental faith. So that when you get way over to the left, you have groups that call themselves Christians who really don't believe in the divinity of Christ, who really don't believe in a supernatural, in a God. They believe in some power. Now, of course, that confuses things. And then they will, if they join the communist movement, they will use the word Christian to describe what they're doing. Of course, this is the great confusion of the people. I knew, what was his name, that reverend over in Brooklyn. What was his name? Who fought for his pulpit, you know, who had a fight with the congregation for his pulpit, do you remember? Mellish, yes. I knew Howard Mellish very well. He was a member of the party, and yet he stood on the platform, you know, in his church, and preached and said that he was a Christian. Well, now, unless he equates communism with Christianity, it's a pretty sad situation. He is a communist, it made me blush. And yet he was a very nice young man, I'm sure. What is your opinion of Senator McCarthy's method of fighting communism? That's a loaded question. I'll tell you what my opinion of Senator McCarthy was. I wasn't in Washington all the time he was fighting communism. My opinion of Joseph McCarthy, and I hope that he is watching over us, is able to pray for us. I think that one of the worst smear jobs ever done in America, in the history of America, was done upon Joseph McCarthy. If Joseph McCarthy had not existed, perhaps millions of Americans who now know a little bit about communism would never have seen it. But Joe McCarthy lifted the sewer covers off the sewer and gave us a whiff of the smell. Now, I don't, in an age when everybody wants to be respectable, sometimes even good Catholics were a little bit embarrassed about Joe, and they would always say, well, I don't mind Joe, but I don't like his methods. Well, let me tell you, in Washington a number of occasions when his committee was holding hearings. I was there particularly when he was holding a hearing on the United Electrical and Radio Workers of America. You may have had some experience with the UE around here. United Electrical and Radio Workers of America was the strongest communist institution. It was stronger than the Communist Party itself. Now, I will say this to you, they probably did a tremendous job fighting for increased wages. And to that extent, you may say, well, the heck with it. I'm glad that they existed. But you've also got to understand that some of the money which they took from the pocketbooks of the workers was used to organize for communist America. But I was there one day when the hearing was being held, and the room was filled with these officers of the union. And Joe and the committee was sitting up here, and I expected any minute that the entire group would jump up and put the committee out of its agonies. What they did was to insult the committee. You asked a man, are you a member of the Communist Party? No. Well, you remember the Communist Party this morning. Fifth Amendment. Have you engaged in activities for destruction to the American people? Fifth Amendment. Then the man would get up from the chair and, without any permission, not saying excuse me or anything of that kind, walk across the room, look out of the window, and then go and get a drink of water. Everything was done, calculated to destroy the power of the committee, destroy the dignity of the committee. Ah, my dear friends, and in that group sat the lawyers of the United Electrical and Radio Workers. Methods, you don't like the methods of McCarthy? Well, the methods of the Communist Party are infinitely worse. Please explain what changes have occurred in the last month to the detriment of the United States Constitution. And I have another one. Could you elaborate on one of your last statements regarding events in the last month? I'll hold that till the end, but I really would like to say something else. What is the procedure that organized intellectuals should follow once they have analyzed the conspiracy? Well, they've got to make their contribution. They've got to find a place where they can make their contribution. And they've got to continue to study and continue to present the facts to the people, to at least a group of people around them. They've got to be joiners too. If you have a group of 10 people who study here, let those 10 people follow the information to hundreds of organizations. Give them the truth, and I know that the American people, if they have the truth, know how to act and know how to protect themselves. But they aren't getting the facts and they aren't getting the truth. Please explain the theory of Dr. Pavlov or the policies of the Soviet government based upon his theories. Well, the whole question of the conditioned reflex, that is, conditioning a human being, the whole question of the attack upon the mind, so that the mind reacts in a similar way when certain stimuli are given to the mind. Now, Pavlov, of course, was interested in the question of testing dogs. He wanted to see what happened if the dog was hungry, if a piece of meat was put in front of his mouth. And he would test the amount of saliva flow, the temperature, his nervous reactions, and so on. Now, then what he would do is take a piece of meat and have a bell ring at the same time. Pretty soon he was able to take the meat away, and the dog had the same reactions when the bell rang, so that he was conditioned. Now, why is this conditioned reflex thing so important in the question of brainwashing human beings? Because the body of a man is like the body of a dog. Unfortunately for the dog, the man has something beyond him. Whether the soul has to be destroyed in order to use the conditioned reflex tactics in brainwashing is something which we don't know about. But they are using the same tactics in conditioning the minds of people by the use of certain words. For instance, if you use the word McCarthyism, often enough you get people who get goose pimples when the word is mentioned, because they've been conditioned in that way. The whole question of competition, millionaires, Wall Street, the use of words, the conditioning, because under certain circumstances, certain things have happened. Now, there's a devilish amount of work being done on how to bend the human mind. That experiments are going on in our own country under certain circumstances leads me to one thing which I think I want to pass on to you, and that is that recently the city of New York became the lead goat for having a centralized system of choosing its Board of Education. Because of the corruption, the Board of Education now, some power is given to the state in choosing our city Board of Education. Everything is going to be done to utilize the schools for conditioning the minds of children so that they will behave as the conspirators want them to behave. You parents are in the process of losing your children. If this technique continues, and it's the uncontrolled. Now there's legitimate, I hate to talk about mental health, because there's a legitimate field for working the mental health field. There's a legitimate approach to trying to solve this problem, and there is the devilish use of the mind and the program of mental health for the purpose of creating further mental disturbances in order to achieve control over human beings. We've instead, unfortunately, the idea that men are so much more healthy now than they were 30 years ago, or 50 years ago, or 100 years ago.
Harold Lasky, who wrote the article for the Encyclopedia Britannica, states that the Jews conceived and created and cultivated the communist movement, and that their energy made them the spearhead of the movement. Harold Lasky wrote it, and no one knew more about communism than he. And the Encyclopedia Britannica for 25 years has been printing it. What more do you want? Anybody else? Well, I can't advocate that you do anything that's criminal or that might get the boys into trouble, but I can tell you this, that you can start what I call an endless thing. If you can get your friends to write, that's get these here. Here is the statement. Mr. Kennedy's office gave me this himself. Mr. Smith, who succeeded Mr. Kennedy, took over his office, was in his office and gave me this for release to AM, that means morning papers, August 26th. He delivered this on the 25th. And it says here, Israel is here to stay. That Israel is here to stay. It is a national commitment